Hey, good day, friends. Welcome to our Power is Within podcast. I'm your host, Chas Smith, and my mission for this podcast is to inspire people to take their power back and to realize that you are the healer that you have been looking for all along. This week's challenge is going to be to play. Simple, right? Yeah. All you got to do is think of something that you enjoy doing just for the fun of it, and then set aside some time this week to do it. And of course, have fun doing it because that's what play is all about, right? This week's guest. You guys, I am so excited to share with you today's episode. Bob Cafaro is going to be sharing a wonderfully inspiring story with us today. I had the best time chatting with him. He is just an amazing human. He's an inspiration in so many ways. And he has this really, this awesome energy. You're going to hear it in just a minute. Like his voice, his energy, the way he just comes across. He's an honest pleasure. And I had the best time chatting with him and literally just getting to hear his story of how he was able to overcome severe multiple sclerosis, known often as MS, is so inspiring. He tells us all about his story and what he's up to these days and how he now maintains his health and well-being. And yeah, it's pretty powerful. Our bodies are absolute gifts and amazing when given the right environment to heal. And Bob's a testament to that today. I think that you guys are going to love this story, and I'm just going to get right into it and introduce Bob to the show.
Bob, thank you so much for being here today with me and everybody who will be tuned in to listen.
My pleasure, Chaz. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really excited to get just to hear more and learn more about you and your story and what you've been through and what you've overcome. So, honestly, I'd like to kind of just start out by opening the floor for you to share a little bit about your story and just what you've been through and kind of give us a brief on what you've been through, what you've gone, through in your healing recovery journey and where you're at today.
Okay. I think the best thing may be to go give a little history chronologically speaking. And going back to this would have been December of 1998, I experienced first symptoms that were MS, obviously unknown to me at the time, but it was numbness in the right leg. The numbness got worse and I started limping. And at one point, my right leg actually collapsed under me and I almost fell down. And at this point, I saw a specialist, an orthopedic surgeon, and he surmised it was just a pinched nerve, nothing to worry about. And then my family doctor, I saw him. And I had started reading in the Mayo Health Clinic book about these symptoms, and they said it was possible MS. I asked him, could it be MS? He says, no, my wife has MS. It's definitely not MS. It was great. And somehow the numbness in the legs subsided, and it seemed to return to normal. And then 2 months later, in February of 1999, I started losing peripheral vision in my left eye, which is optic neuritis, which I had never experienced, and hopefully people will never experience that. It's when fields of vision actually start disappearing from view and you lose peripheral vision in places. So at this point, I tried to get an appointment with a neurologist, and everybody was booked. After 1 week, I was able to see a neurosurgeon, and I could tell from the way he looked at me that he thought it was MS, even though he didn't say that. He sent me to the first neurologist I had ever seen in my life. So we're in February of 1999. I had waited a week before I saw this guy, and he did an MRI of my brain. It was clean. There were no lesions. And he said, you have MS. And this was, to me, a death sentence because I'm a cellist. I play the cello in the Philadelphia Orchestra since 1985. And my only knowledge of MS is the great British cellist Jacqueline du Pré, who stopped playing at the age of 25 due to MS. and she died from complications of the disease at age 42. So to be told I have MS was basically a death sentence for me. And I remember when he said that, I just couldn't believe it. And I walked out of that office thinking, this guy's crazy, because I had no lesions on my brain. He's an epilepsy specialist. Therefore, it's a misdiagnosis. So I contacted my brother-in-law, who worked for the NIH at the time, National Institutes of Health. And he said, don't panic on a first opinion. And he set up an appointment with, he got in touch with, what was his name at the time? Henry McFarland, who was the head of MS at the National Institutes of Health. He set up an appointment with Dr. Fred Lublin, who is considered one of the three most prominent specialists in the country. And he was at Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia. And now he's director of MS at Mount Sinai in New York. So I saw Fred Lublin, and he had some doubts, and he sent me to a rheumatologist. And I went through the gauntlet of tests, tested from everything: heavy metal toxicity, Lyme disease, AIDS. You think of it, I was tested for it. I was tested for every rheumatoid disease in the book as well. And he thought that it might have been vasculitis, which the only other thing I've seen about that was in Dr. Roy Swank's book, the MS Diet book, which was at the time really one of the only books available that I knew of. And I had these unexplained blisters on my toes. And Dr. Swank makes reference to that in his book, that it's one of the symptoms. But Fred Lublin thought this was a sign of vasculitis. He sends me to a rheumatologist. Every rheumatoid disease comes back negative. I go back to Fred Lublin, and he says, you have MS. This is a definitive case. And I keep pestering him. How certain are you? He says, well, I'm 95% sure that you have MS. So I still didn't want to believe this. I'm, hanging on to this hope that somehow it's a misdiagnosis, and I'm in that small percentage of people that's misdiagnosed. So here we go. He starts me on Avonex. He sends me to also sent me to a neuro-ophthalmologist at Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, Dr. Robert Surgott, who's now head of neuro-ophthalmology at the hospital, very prominent and very skilled, very respected. And he starts me on Avonex, which is the intramuscular injection of interferon. So I asked Fred Lublin, what is, basically what's the risk of taking this drug? He says, there's absolutely no risk at all, and you should be on it. So I start this drug, and it's absolutely brutal for anybody that's taken this drug. You inject the drug the night before. You have to take ibuprofen to basically counter the effects of the drug. And then the next day you have a case of the flu so bad that your hair hurts. So you do this once a week, and it was just awful. So let's move on now.
Can I stop and ask you a question?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. At this point, after like all this, trial and error, and going to the doctors and having all these tests done, and still just like wanting to believe that you weren't actually, like that you didn't have MS, were you still just only dealing with the two symptoms you mentioned at that point? Because you said the numbness got better, but then you had the peripheral vision issues and then the blisters on the feet. But was that it, or were you starting to progress?
So here we go. So the blisters on the feet had kind of subsided. They left minor scars for a while. The vision in my left eye never recovered to this day. So I did lose some peripheral vision in the left eye. So moving on, I was on this quest to prove that I had been misdiagnosed. And I started exercising like a fiend, and I'm basically other than the vision in my left eye, I'm asymptomatic at this point. And that summer, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to know, why did they feel so confident that you had MS when you had like virtually no symptoms and you had no lesions?
Oh, okay. So I forgot to say two things. So let's backtrack. In February of 1999, this is Robert Sperling. He was the first neurologist I saw. Even though I had no lesions, he said, when you have numbness in one leg and peripheral vision loss in one eye, that's a textbook case of MS, which I didn't want to believe. Then I went to Fred Lublin, and it was one of the fellows at his practice. She felt my neck and said, I think your issues are coming from your neck. And they did MRIs in the neck, and 3 small lesions showed up in the spinal cord. So that point, I forgot to tell you this. So at that point, Fred Lublin deemed this a definitive case of MS. So everything else ruled out, 3 lesions in the spinal cord. So at this point, that was when I pestered him about the definitive diagnosis, and he said he was 95% certain it was.
Gotcha. Okay. So sounds good. Thank you.
I failed to disclose that. So
that makes more sense for me.
So
thank you.
Here we go. I'm asymptomatic, and now the summer of 1999 comes, and I'm on this quest to prove I'm misdiagnosed. I'm Iron Man. I'm doing these 30-mile bike rides in a brutal heat wave upstate New York, and it's 95 degrees, and I'm with these guys doing 30-mile bike rides, which is, in retrospect, this is something of an imprudent move, to say the least. All of a sudden, I start losing peripheral vision in my right eye. So this is scary because the left eye never recovered completely. So I'm upstate New York teaching at a summer music festival. I hightail it back home, go see Dr. Robert Surgott, and he puts me on intravenous steroids for the second time now. So I failed to disclose this as well. February of 1999, I had 3 days of intravenous steroids. That's 1,000 milligrams of methylprednisolone dripped into your veins for 3 days. So I get on another cycle, 3 days of intravenous steroids, followed by, the oral steroids. When you basically you wean off of it with oral steroids, starting with 100 milligrams of prednisone, and you taper down to 10. So things stabilized for about a week. Okay, and then I started getting a stomach bug, and I started vomiting. And, a stomach bug goes away in a day or two, right? This one didn't go away, and it kept at me. And I was like approaching 6-7 days now of vomiting, and I'm not able to keep down any food or water. And I wind up hospitalized for severe dehydration. So I'm in the hospital for 4 days, and they can't do anything for me. And I'm on Avonex this whole time. So they finally give me an anti-motion sickness drug. I get out of the hospital. I am so bad, I can't move my hands. I mean, I can't even hold a telephone. I can't feel anything with my hands. Both eyes are so bad, I'm like legally blind. I can see silhouettes of people, and that's it. I can hardly walk. I'm incontinent. I like can't hold my urine. I can't feel when I have to defecate. I mean, everything's gone. My body feels like I'm getting electric current. It's awful. So at this point, I'm trying to get a hold of Fred Lublin, and I don't realize he is in the process of moving to New York. So he gets back to me after 3 days, and I couldn't even get in to see him. So I managed to get a new appointment with a neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania, Clyde Markowitz, very esteemed neurologist. So I go to see Clyde Markowitz, and I'm basically in a wheelchair now. It's so bad. He does an MRI of my brain and spinal cord, and I have over 50 lesions in my brain, and my spinal cord has a lesion that measures 3.5 centimeters in length, and it takes up the entire spinal cord. So
wow,
and
this was in a very short time span.
Yeah,
from
this is
first.
Right. This is August of 1999 now.
You're talking about 6-7 months total.
Right. Yeah.
That you went from 3 very small lesions in your spinal cord to over 50 in your brain.
Right.
Being
Yeah,
on medicine the whole time.
the whole time. Yeah.
Wow.
So he does an MRI and he sees this and he puts me on intravenous steroids for 10 days, which is 1,000 milligrams of methylprednisolone, and followed by 6 weeks of oral steroids. And, I start experiencing all these immunosuppressant complications. You name it, bad nightmares. I get this bad infection in my left elbow that comes out of nowhere. You know, and at this point, I go to see Robert Surgott again at Wills Eye Hospital, and I sit down, and he gives me a basic vision test. I can't even see the largest letters on the chart. And then he gives me a visual field test, where you hold the clicker in your hand and you click every time you see a light flash in the periphery. And I sit there just poker face, stone cold, not clicking once because I can't see anything. He stops the test and he says to me, okay, he says, I'll write you a note for permanent disability. And, you talk about a death sentence. Here I am, in 8 months, I'm going from the successful cellist in the Philadelphia Orchestra to someone who's going to be on permanent disability for the rest of my life. And
Wow.
I
Were you
remember
still playing at the time that for those 8 months or no?
I was playing up until a few weeks before, but now, my hands were so shot. So he tells me, I'll write you a note for permanent disability. And this was like, I write this in my book. I say that this is like, Ebenezer Scrooge being shown the ghost of Christmas Present, where he's at his own grave. And I told him, I said, you can take that note and you can use it as a suppository. I said, because I'm going back to work in 6 weeks when the orchestra season starts in mid-September. And he looks at me, he says, how are you going to do that? And I said, at this point I started crying and I said, I'm going to go back. And he said, well, I'm going to be honest. He says, I've seen people in your situation a year from now, they're still in a wheelchair. And a year from now, I've seen other people, you wouldn't know anything's wrong with them. And I said, I'm going to be one of those people. You won't know anything's wrong with me in a year. So I go home and I take the cello out of the case and here I am just out of the hospital here. I haven't touched cello in a while. And I try to play and it's completely hopeless. Like everything's gone. It's like trying to explain to a 3-year-old how to play the cello and they have no idea what you're talking about. My hands are just completely disconnected from my brain and everything I had was just gone. So at this point, I decided I'm going to go back to work in 6 weeks and I start my own research at this point. I have this big, giant computer screen where I enlarge these letters and I start all my own research because Western medicine is not helping at all. So the first thing I find, and Chaz, please feel free to interrupt at any time. I know I'm talking.
Oh, it's okay. I like it.
Okay.
You're
the
good.
First thing I find a website called The Water Cure, written by an Iranian doctor who's been written off as a quack by Western medicine. And he does a study in an Iranian prison where he gives the prisoners half their body weight in ounces of water a day. So meaning me, I'm 160 pounds. That means 80 ounces of water a day. So I start doing this and I noticed my first sign of improvement. I started to feel a little better. And I was like, wow, I may be onto something here. So just to backtrack, at this time, Lance Armstrong, do you remember him?
Oh, yeah. I read his book.
Yeah, I read his book too. And I followed him and he was my hero up until we found out a little more about him. But
yeah,
still, I still have a lot of respect for what he did as far as beating his cancer that should have killed him. So I wanted to be like him. And here I was, pretty avid cyclist. And I got back on my bike, but I couldn't see anything. And I had my 2 young children in front of me because I could see their silhouettes, and that was it. And I remember I lowered the seat all the way down. I put on, those protective elbow things, gloves, a helmet, everything. And I could still balance on 2 wheels. It was amazing. I could hardly walk, but I could balance on a bicycle. So I'm like, okay, a couple of things happen. I start to feel better and I can balance on a bike. I'm going to get my body back. So I start doing all my own research, and I start looking at world rates of MS, and I see that, your poorest nations have 1/3 the rates of MS as your wealthy industrialized nations. So what's going on here? I start looking at Japan, and I've been to Japan many times with the Philadelphia Orchestra on tour. Japan has very, very low rates of MS, even though they have, severe overcrowding, they have severe pollution, they've got all kinds of issues, but their MS rates are a fraction of ours. What are they doing differently? And I'm realizing there's got to be something with the diet. And then I start looking at the Okinawa centenarian study. Okinawa is a prefecture in Japan. And if you look at the OCS, the study, they studied over 900 people over the age of 100, and they were all in perfect health. And in this study, the women didn't screen for breast, ovarian, cervical cancers. The men don't have the heart disease. They don't have diabetes. They don't have all these illnesses that are so common in the West. So I decide I'm onto something here. And instead of, following Western medicine here, I'm going to look what do these people who live to be over 100 and in perfect health do? So I basically started coming up with my own diet. And just to give you an idea, Dr. Terry Walls, right? Anybody who's listening that knows MS will know her very well. I was diagnosed in 1999. She was diagnosed in 2000. And her book, The Walls Protocol, which is considered a Bible for MS sufferers, that book wasn't published until 2014. So here we are, we're in 1999, and I have nothing to guide me other than the MS Diet book by Roy Swank. So I start looking at my own research here, and I start modeling a diet after this Okinawa centenarian study. And if you look at what they do, it's a very low-calorie, plant-based diet. If they do eat meat, chicken, or fish, it's the size of a deck of cards and no more, and they stop eating when they're 80% full. And 67% of their diet is organic sweet potatoes. So let's try this. So I start really reducing my caloric content. And also I had stumbles on some success without understanding what I was doing. So here, when I started drinking half my body weight in ounces, I started to feel better, and in ounces of water rather. So I started drinking 2 quarts of water every morning before I did anything. So, and this is filtered water, I have a reverse osmosis filter. So here, what's happening is there's no room in my stomach for food until I feel hungry, which is probably mid-afternoon. So what happens without realizing, I'm intermittently fasting every day for a period of about 12 to 16 hours. So let's move on. I start, maybe half of my diet is organic sweet potatoes. I cut out everything. I cut out junk food. I cut out alcohol. I cut out, there's no recreational drugs in my life. There's, I start, sugar. I start cutting out salt. I start cutting out everything. And I start living on this, hunter-gatherer diet, very low-calorie, plain diet. And what I'm doing essentially without realizing this, and this is what Robert Surgott, the doctor at Wills Eye Hospital, said, that I'm changing the microbiome in my gut and therefore affecting my immune system. And it's basically transforming the immune system. So I start doing all this, and then I start the diet, I start the water, and I'm starting to feel better. I'm cycling every day, and my vision's returning, and I'm back to work for the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I still can't move my hands, but I'm back there, and I'm basically miming it. I'm sitting in the back of the section with the music enlarged, and I tell everybody it's a misdiagnosis, but I can't move my hands, and I'm just going through the motions. I'm unable to play. So I'm laughing about this, but it wasn't funny at the time. So
did your boss know that you were actually playing?
No, I was just faking. I was basically because there were, how many? 11 other cellos in the orchestra. So I'm basically just going through the motions, and not making any sound. I'm doing air cello, as they say.
Okay.
So, so anyway, I'm starting to cycle, and my body's starting to rebuild very gradually now. And I start looking at other things as well. And one of the things that happened, I'm on this drug Avonex, and one of those rainy days, you start, that packet insert that comes with the drug, you unfold it and it goes down to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at this thing, and I start looking at the clinical trial results on it. And what really got me was, after 2 years on the drug in the study, the success rate between the drug group and the placebo group were nearly identical. And for the listeners unfamiliar with the placebo, it's basically a sugar pill, a water injection. It's a fake drug, and they're telling people, here's a drug that's going to make you better. And it does nothing, but yet in every clinical trial, you get people in the placebo groups that get better. And this is written off as an anomaly by science and medicine. But when I read this stopped me in my tracks. How could you have a study with an identical result in the placebo group and the drug group? So I started looking at clinical trials, and I started looking at why MS is one of the more difficult diseases to come up with effective medication for. And the reason is that you have a disproportionately high success rate in the placebo groups of clinical trials. So I decided I'm going to learn the placebo group I'm going to learn the placebo effect as a skill, rather. So I found this book called You Are the Healer, about the Silva method, and it's about training the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with my own meditation, and I started meditating. And I started with a small, maybe 5 minutes a day, and I built up to 2 30-minute sessions a day where I sat and I repeated commands that my MS is going into remission. The use of my hands is returning. My brain is finding new pathways to the muscles, plasticity. The optic nerves are regenerating. My body is coming back. It is getting strong. And I sit there repeating these commands to myself in a very quiet environment for 2 30-minute sessions a day. And
Were you doing this like self-guided, or were you listening to a guided one?
I never sought help from anyone. I never went to an MS support group. This was all on my own.
Oh, sorry. I just meant the meditations. Were they guided?
No,
or self-guided?
I came up with my own.
Your own little mantras and sayings.
And I did this, and also repeating those commands, I envisioned I could actually, like a video where I watched the lesions disappearing. So that was one of the other things I really started actively doing. And then I started using experiences of my life, books I had read. A lot of people may be interested, or they may remember the book Alive, about the plane crash in the Andes Mountains in 1972, where the plane crashed up above the tree line at 11,500 feet. And 72 days later, they found the survivors had lived up there in hospitable conditions. Wow. And I had looked at Lance Armstrong, someone that beat cancer that should have killed him. The doctors told him he had a 50% chance of survival, but privately confided a 20% chance of survival. I studied Bobby Fischer, who was insane, but he was, probably one of the greatest chess players that ever lived. But he took the title from the Soviet Union in 1972, and he did this on his own, and just by sheer determination. And another one was Nolan Ryan, the great baseball pitcher who pitched over 100 miles an hour for 27 seasons, and he pitched 7 no-hitters, and he accomplished records that will probably never be equaled. And if you look at all these people, I write about them in my book, and I title this, people who accomplished the impossible. So basically, I set out to discover the mindset of these people. It's it's this determination, that sheer will that they will overcome anything. And I set out to be one of these people. So that was another thing that I did. The whole mindset. There's that saying that your altitude is your attitude is your altitude. I got that backwards from me, but basically mindset was a lot of it. So so let's fast forward here, and what happens is the cells of the human body are constantly dying and being replaced. And in 7 years, every cell in your body is replaced with a new one. Your bones are the slowest to regenerate. And it took me about 3.5 years, I would say, to rebuild my body. So what happened was, here I am, I'm cycling like to work. I'm like, exercising like a fiend. I'm in remission now for how many years now? This is going back. And I stopped taking the Avonex after 4.5 years because all it was doing was making me sick. And I didn't go to a doctor for 11 years. I didn't go back to my neurologist. I didn't see anybody for 11 years.
Wow, not once.
No.
And I'm surprised you even took the Avonex for 4.5 years, because you still decided to continue taking it even after realizing that the placebo had just as great of an impact?
Yeah, I did. But what happened was I, kept doing more and more research. And then I found that the drug slowed the progression of MS down with 38% of the people that took it. And here I was not only slowing down the progression, but I was reversing the disease. So I made the decision without consulting medical professionals that this drug was not helping me at all. And all it was doing was making me so sick once a week that I had to take drugs to counter the side effects of the drugs.
Right.
And, for the listeners who know Dr. Terry Walls, her mindset is, if a drug makes you so sick that you need to take drugs to counter the side effects, how is that going to help the cells of your body heal and rebuild?
Right. Yeah.
So here I am now. I'm afraid to go back to a neurologist now. And we're in 2003 now. So we're, I think this is 11 years. What year is this? No. So 1999, we're in 2013. Okay, we're fast forwarding. I'm in incredible physical condition. I'm lifting weights. I'm following Nolan Ryan's exercise guide with his yoga-based exercise, lifting weights. I had devised this whole MS exercise regimen for myself based on yoga, including weightlifting. So in 2013, there was a speaker series at the Kimmel Center where the Philadelphia Orchestra plays. And I looked up and I saw Nando Parado, the guy who survived the 1972 plane crash, was speaking. And I was like, whoa, this is too good to be true, because I considered this guy one of my guides. And if you look at what Nando Parado did, when the plane crashed up at 11,500 feet, he was thrown from row 9 into the bulkhead. His skull was fractured in 4 places. They thought he was dead, and they put him in the cold with the bodies. And after 3 days, this guy miraculously awakes from a coma. And they can't believe this guy's alive. 72 days after the crash, Nando shows up in the foothills, and he got help. And this guy, who had never seen snow, he had no survival training, he had no equipment, he had no food. The only source of food was the bodies of the people perished in the crash. He went 37.5 miles through one of the most difficult mountain ranges in the world. And what this guy did was not humanly possible. And if you look at mountain climbing teams reconstructed his route, and they said what this guy did was insane. And I went to his lecture in 2013, and then, I work at the Kimmel Center, so I went backstage afterward, and I met him, and, I told him, I always wanted to meet you. You were my guide when I was, up on the mountain, and he gave me a hug, and it was so strange because at this point, he gave me a hug, and I knew I had cured myself, even though I had never seen a doctor. So I go back to my neurologist after I hadn't seen him for 11 years. And he tells me to get a whole nother set of MRIs, and I didn't want to do this. And he says, why not? And I said, well, I didn't want to subject my body to any more tests. And the real reason was I was really afraid of what would show up in those MRIs. So I do. He finally convinces me, listen, he says, if you're going to write a book, you can't just say you're cured. You have to have definitive proof. So I go through the MRIs, brain and spinal cord. I go back to see him a couple of weeks later when the results are in. And he looks at the images and he says, you did the impossible. And there are no lesions in my brain or spinal cord.
Wow.
And, at this point, he gets out a pen and a pad and he says, tell me what you're doing. And, and he starts writing stuff down. And then he says, okay, he says, let me just give you the basic test. And he starts testing, my cognitive functions. He's testing, my legs. He's testing it. And he says, okay, let me see you walk across the room. He says, come back. He says, do it on your heels. Come back. He says, wow, that looks so much better than it did. And I said, watch this. And I put my hands on the floor and I went up into a handstand.
Wow.
And he says, wait here for a minute. He comes back with 5 other neurologists and he says, do that again. And I got down on the floor, put my hands, and I did a handstand in the middle of the floor. And, he was just amazed at what I did. So basically, I've stuck with what I've done now for 23 years, and I've been completely asymptomatic. And the only residual effects I've had now, my left peripheral vision never recovered. And I have a sensory loss in my hands that feels slightly like my hands are asleep, but it's somehow on the surface of my skin up above, like the way the analogy would be, how gasoline doesn't burn, it's the vapors burn, right? If you ever see up close, how gasoline is burning, the liquid's not burning. It's like this, very small distance up above where the flames are. That's the way my hands feel asleep. So I've been completely asymptomatic for 23 years other than those 2 issues. And I still, I fast for about 16 hours every day. I still live on an organic plant-based diet. I don't eat meat. I don't eat chicken. And, I basically, my only junk food is sushi.
Okay.
Because of the reduced rates of MS in Japan. So, to summarize here, I must be doing something right. And I still, I'm very serious about my water intake. So basically that's about where we are.
Wow. And so it's interesting because, so you're still playing the cello?
Yeah. And everything came back completely. And actually I'm playing a cello concerto this Sunday with a youth orchestra.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, and you still play for the orchestra?
I still play for the use of my hands came back. And
so even though there's this very mild asleep-like feeling, you have full function of them.
Right. And I have full feeling with my hands, even though I've learned to work around this. And
so it's you have feeling, but they have this very mild asleep feeling.
Yeah, that never went away. Right. And I could say an analogy would be something like if you get a scratch on the lens of your eyeglasses, it's annoying at first, but you get used to it.
Right.
And that's exactly what this is. I don't even notice it anymore. If I think about it, oh yeah, it's still there. But
did they have any kind of hypothesis as to how you have no actual, you have no sign, you have no MS left. There's no lesions. There's nothing. You are literally cured and recovered from MS, but you have these 2 kind of lingering symptoms. Did they have any hypothesis as to why? Was it a...
Yeah, I mean, that's permanent nerve damage because
Gotcha.
I was hit so hard. This thing took me out like a freight train and it was so brutal. And it just, to have that lesion in my spinal cord, that's what Dr. Robert Surgat, he says that explained the loss of my hands and, the shakiness on my feet, the incontinence, everything was, from that lesion in the spinal cord. But basically, after I published my book, he was the featured speaker at one of my book signings, and it was very interesting to hear his take on how I changed my immune system, because he said he never saw anybody come back from where I was.
So you had what they would consider a rather progressive and quote unquote bad case.
Yeah, it was awful. And so he said, if I could just go into this quickly, he said, number one, changing the diet to an organic plant-based diet changed the microbiome in my gut, which changed the immune system. And also, I was doing a lot of cycling to rebuild my body, and I wanted to be the Lance Armstrong, come back from the abyss, and I was cycling constantly to work. I was doing the 11 point some miles into Philadelphia. I was biking at night with lights. I was, constantly on the bike. And he said that because I'm cycling outside, I'm getting a lot of sunlight and I'm getting high levels of vitamin D from the sun. Mm-hmm. And he basically, talked about the correlation between low levels of D and high levels of MS. So really that, I reflected pretty much on what he said. And I thought about microbiome in the gut, vitamin D, but there were also other things I did. Here I was cycling outside in really cold weather. And I was so worried about overheating my body that, in really cold weather, I had an absolute minimum of clothing on. And the idea was to have my body generate its own heat. And I'm cycling, even if it's like 33, 34 degrees, I have a windbreaker and a t-shirt on and, tights, just keeping my skin covered, but no insulation. So also, I'm so worried about overheating my body, I'm taking cold showers every day. So any of the listeners familiar with, do you know Wim Hof, the Iceman?
Yeah.
Okay. My son, who's a professional MMA fighter, he actually studied with Wim Hof. He went to his seminar, and my son does ice bath every day. He submerges his body in ice water for about 10 minutes every day. So if you look at the human body was designed for adaptation. We were designed to, basically adapt to different temperatures, different climates, but everything we do now is 75 degrees of comfort. The car, the house, work, shopping, everywhere we go, we have one constant temperature. And what happens is the human body loses its ability for adaptation, and therefore we compromise the immune system. This is all theory, but I happen to agree with this wholeheartedly. And if you look at when you expose your body to cold, you're reawakening the ability for adaptation. And what that does is that awakens the immune system as well. It changes your immune system and it basically turbocharges it. It strengthens it. So that's another factor that I think was a key part of my recovery and reversal of the disease. The other thing was fasting. And when you fast, when you have no food in your system for a period of 16 hours, you are basically, what's happened is ketosis sets in at that point. And after 16 hours is when the cells of your body will start to heal and rebuild. And, just a quick summary of what happens here. When you eat food, your body produces insulin. And that insulin changes the sugar, the glucose, into energy. And what's not used is stored in your fat cells. And that's a reserve. And the human body was designed to go for days at a time without food. The problem is we eat 3 big meals a day now, not because we're hungry, but because we're conditioned to. And what happens is we never tap into those reserves and we just keep building and building and building more reserves. And we get high levels of sugar. We get high levels of, everything else that's not good. And this becomes the seedbed for, diabetes, obesity, you name it. So, here with all this water and also I'm, doing the Okinawa thing, and I start unknowingly intermittently fasting every day for at least, 12, 16 hours. And then I started fasting 1 day a week. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I had guessed right on everything. So, I continue this, I go 16 hours every day without food. So I think those four things, diet, vitamin D, what is it, exposure to cold, and also the fasting. I think those things are what basically, the those things together, I think, really had a huge effect on changing my immune system.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you're definitely talking about things that are super important for us, for all of us, whether or not we have MS or anything, just for general health and well-being, especially that getting that morning sunshine. So many people, like you said, we're not only so used to just we want to be comfortable all the time, and so we're used to that constant temperature, but also so many people are so afraid of sunshine. I mean, people, the minute there's any sunshine outside, people cover themselves completely up and limit that vitamin D exposure
Right.
because they're so afraid of it. They've been conditioned to think that it's bad or dangerous. And obviously, we want to do things with you don't want to be out in the sun all day where where it's like constant and you're creating damage, especially if you live in a climate that's like really hot all the time. But there is so much benefit in getting adequate sunshine. That morning sunlight is really beneficial. That afternoon sunlight, around sunset time.
Yeah, I mean,
And
if you think that sunshine is basically the engine behind life, and
mhm,
if you think that fossil fuel is stored sunlight, if you think that basically when you eat plants, you're eating energy from the sun, right? The
mhm,
sun provides everything about life.
right. Yeah, I love sunshine. Do you still do meditation?
I don't now.
Not so much.
No,
Now,
because they're basically, and I must admit, a certain sense of complacency after 23 years of being asymptomatic. So
yeah, yeah. And what would you say, like, I guess, what was your life like before this? Because right now, so you're not doing the meditation, but you did that for a period of time where it sounds like you were really supporting creating new neural pathways and changes in at a cellular level and, probably calming your mind. But you said you have these major key players: diet, sunshine, cold, and fasting. And then you're doing your exercise. But what was life like before all this ever started? Were you exercising before this started? Do you feel like your mindset is really different now than before all this ever started?
yeah, I was always in good shape. I always loved cycling, and I did yoga every day for a little bit, but not like I do now. Now I
Hmm.
do a whole regimen. I actually put my whole exercise regimen on YouTube. It takes about 30 minutes. If you just Google, get on YouTube, Cafaro regimen, and you can watch what I do every morning. And it's a combination of the yoga, the deep breathing. I think deep breathing makes a huge difference. The weights, the upper body. I do handstands, chin ups, and here I'm at 63 years old, and I'm probably in better physical condition than I was at 20 now.
That's so awesome. You got younger. What about mindset? Is that vastly different now from before it all started?
I think the whole thing, the whole experience really changed my mindset, and it gave me a confidence. It instilled this belief that I'm capable of anything I put my mind to. Because
Hmm.
what the neurologist said, you did the impossible, and that's very powerful for him to say that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I do believe it in that sense.
So you
Unfortunately,
built
yeah,
confidence.
I'm mortal. I'm going to die at some point, but hopefully, I'm confident I'll be one of the centenarians.
Nice, nice.
So,
And you mentioned you had children. So did you notice any shift in your relationships through this experience?
yeah, there was whoa, there was anyway. So I went through a pretty contentious divorce when I got sick, and they say that an illness can make a marriage stronger. It can rip it apart. In my case, it did rip it apart, and it cost me pretty heavily with collateral damage with my relationship with my daughter, and my son, I have a good relationship with now after years and years of trying to rebuild that. So I'm hoping one day I could have a good relationship with my daughter as well.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, it sounds like you're on the right path for that.
I hope so.
And then what about, okay, so would you, I guess, what would you say to anyone, say there's somebody out there and they find this episode because they have MS, and they're listening to this, but they've already been told, perhaps even by a doctor, because sadly sometimes we get doctors that tell us, that tell us things that really get in our head and become our story. So say they've already been told that their MS is too far along and that they don't have any hope. There's no chance of repair. If they're like stuck in that story of mine is too bad, my lesions are too big, and they're kind of like at that hopeless state, what advice would you give them?
Well, again, I think it's important to understand that I'm not a doctor. I have no medical background. I have no medical training. I have no background in science, biology, pharmacology, fitness, nutrition, nothing. But, MS affects everybody differently. And Dr. Terry Wallace thinks I was fortunate that I didn't have 8 years of this in my system. I had 8 months before I aggressively started making every possible change to my lifestyle, my diet, everything. So she thinks that was a big advantage for me.
Mm-hmm.
But, a healthy lifestyle will benefit everyone regardless of their state of health. And, I'm going to look at it this way, that the drugs that we have for MS, there's no cure for the disease. And all the drugs can do now is slow the progression down.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that, you have nothing to lose by, trying everything you can as far as, leave no stone unturned as far as, diet, exercise, hydration, mindset, meditation, these things all, the culmination of all those things will yield benefits to everyone.
Yeah, I agree. You have nothing to lose. If you've already been told by a doctor that it's all downhill from here, then why not do everything you can to like take your power back and see what is possible?
Right. I was told exactly that. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, no, God gave you a middle finger. It's time to use it.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Oh, I like that. This is not necessarily MS related or healing related, but it can be. But if you only had um, one, if you were told that you could only share one message with the whole wide world for the rest of your life, what message would you want to share?
My message would be to cancel your membership in our toxic society. As far as diet, it would be like, I would say, as far as, all we have, say GMOs, genetically modified organisms in our food, pesticides, all these things. I would say vote with your wallet, cancel your membership, show that, that there's a need for a healthy lifestyle. And it's funny because even the big box stores like Costco now, they've got this amazing assortment of organic food now because
Right.
people want it.
Yep.
And that's a sign that people are getting smarter. They're voting with their wallets.
Yep. Yep. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any other insights or just thoughts or advice that you would want to share based on your own personal experience for anyone out there listening, whether, whatever they're going through?
Yeah, I believe that we're all capable of being one of those people who accomplish the impossible. And it's funny that to have listened to Nando Parato's speech, he said that he is no extraordinary human being by any means. He said he just refused to die. And he never thought that he had the capability to do anything like what he did. And I think that, we're all capable of doing amazing things if we put our minds to it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The whole time you were telling the story about him, all I could sit there and think was, wow, he had the will to live. Like that was it. He made a decision and he really, really had the will to live.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we need that. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and how people can find your book and also connect with you?
Sure. Well, I wrote the book, and I'm pretty proud of it. Never thought I'd write a book, but I never had anything like this to write about. So my website, bobcafaro.com, and you can order a signed print copy directly from me, and I ship it to you, or you could download the book on Amazon Kindle, and that's all right on the website on the homepage. And also, I did a TED Talk. And that's on the homepage of my website as well. That's probably where you found me. Am I right, Chaz?
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I found you on YouTube originally.
Okay. And also, I've helped people in one-on-one consultations, personally and in video. And I've had a lot of success with helping people as far as have nowhere else to turn. And it's not just people with MS, it's people with other illnesses as well that, Western medicine and doctors are, really unable to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's something it's time to help yourself, and it's funny that Robert Surgott, the neuro-ophthalmologist at Wills Eye Hospital, said that, he said, we're very limited with what we can do for people with MS. And I have a saying of my own. It says, doctors in medicine are limited, but you have no limits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
And if you think of that, like the human spirit has no limits. Like you are capable of anything.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. That's beautiful. Are you are on YouTube? Are you on any social media?
Yeah, I've taken a break from it because it was taking up about 3 hours every day, doing videos, editing, doing newsletters, doing, answering emails, answering comments. It was really taking up about 3 hours a day. And, this isn't my profession. I don't have a team to help me here. And it was really cutting into my cello playing and my piano playing as well. I like to practice the cello. I like to practice the piano for an hour a day. And, all these things were falling by the wayside with social media. So I will get back to it, though. I need to get a balance where I can do social media but not have it take over my life. So I will.
When you find that balance, you let me know.
Yeah, and also I should tell people that I had COVID. I got hit with it in January, and I was completely recovered in 2.5 days. And on day 4, I biked 10 miles. I worked with weights again, did my yoga, everything. So,
wow,
that
you just got you have yourself like in a really good place.
Right, my immune system. And also I do take vitamin D3 because my wife runs a study for hospital workers. And she works for a functional medicine doc now, and she loves it. So that's the only thing I take, vitamin D3. I don't take any medication.
Yeah, it's a good supplement, especially in areas where you're not getting ample sunshine throughout all the seasons of the year.
And I think that makes a big difference when you get hit with COVID. And it's not if, it's when you get hit with COVID. Because I believe we will all get it.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Now, okay, last question, and then I'll let you go. But if somebody out here is listening and they're like, where do I start? Where would you just, out of all the things we've talked about, where would you say is like maybe the first place you'd encourage somebody to start, or maybe the first place you tell them to use as a resource?
The first thing I would do, my book is helpful because I detail everything I did with my diet and a lot of trial and error. So you can learn from my mistakes, not your own.
Okay.
And I would say the first thing is to basically reevaluate your entire diet and hydration. I would cut out anything that the human body was not meant to ingest and, go to basically a hunter-gatherer, low-calorie diet. And to me, that's the first place I would start.
All right. And also, of course, reading your book.
Yeah,
and I'll put the links in the show notes for people to have easy access to check that out.
Yeah. And, if anybody wants to contact me, they welcome to do it through the website or directly. It's bobcafarollc@gmail.com.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate you connecting with me today and sharing your story with everyone who's going to be listening to it. And hopefully we can send this continued message of inspiration and empowerment and the idea that healing is possible.
Great. Chaz, thank you so much for reaching out and for the invitation. And I can't tell you how appreciative I am. And I wish everybody good health. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, y'all, there it is. How amazing is Bob's story? Am I right? You guys, our bodies are so amazing. And every day, I am more and more inspired by different stories of what is possible. From many perspectives, Bob's story is a miracle, right? But for those of us who understand the intelligence of our bodies, we know that we are capable of miracles every single day. And honestly, I believe our body is just one big giant miracle in and of itself, if you really think about it. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope you will share it with a friend and on your social media, because who doesn't want to hear a story like this? So let's spread the word and let more people out in the world know what's possible. Also, please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed these episodes. And as always, there is a link in the bottom of the show notes to the virtual tip jar if you want to support future episodes. Now, go and play, have so much fun, and until next time, make this week so great.